This Age at Work webinar from Business in the Community. So this webinar today is about our age target for 1 million more older workers by 2022, and we'll be talking about why it's important to have this goal and how employers can achieve it. So thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you find it interesting and useful. My name's Jenny and I'm the Age Research and Policy Manager at Business in the Community, so I'll be taking you through the webinar today. If you do have any technical issues at all during this webinar, please do email Sana at sana.butt@bitc.org.uk. So her email address is on the screen in front of you. If you have any questions throughout, can you use the question tab on your panel, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So to outline what we'll be talking about today, we're going to start off with what is the business champion and the target that the business champion has set. Why is achieving this target important? We'll then look at how employers can achieve the target and what steps you can take to do it in your own organisation. We'll talk about commit and publish. Finally, we will run through a couple of stories from employers, and then we'll have a Q&A. So, what is the business champion and the target? Now, in September 2016, the government appointed the Business in the Community Age at Work leadership team as the business champion for older workers. Our leadership team is led by Andy Briggs, who is the CEO UK Insurance at Aviva UK Life. So this role forms part of a wider strategy for fuller working lives and increasing the number of older workers in the workforce. This role is very much an opportunity for us to support employers and our members to adapt to the needs of the ageing population through better retention and retraining and recruiting of older workers. So as part of this role as a business champion, we decided to set a target back in February for 1 million more older people in work by 2022. And when we talk about older workers, it's not necessarily because this group of people are old, it's because when we look at what happens at age 50 in the employment market, age discrimination starts to set in. People are more likely to be made redundant, and people are generally less valued in the workplace. So this target aims very much to support older people who want the same range of options and opportunities as their younger colleagues, and many of whom aren't getting those at the moment, and for them to also just be recognised for their experience and expertise. So why 1 million? So the graph up on front of you at the moment shows the employment rate by type of employment and age. And as you can see, there's a blue streak on the graph, and that shows the ages between 50 and 64. So that's in the run-up before state pension age. And that employment rate essentially falls off a cliff. So that's something that we need to change. Now, we need to close the gap between the peak employment rate for the younger age group and the employment rates for the older age groups. Our 1 million more target is a national target based on ONS data from 2015. So when we look at the numbers rounded, there are 15 million people in the UK aged 50 to 69, but only 9 million of those are in work, and we intend to increase that to over 10 million over the next 5 years. The Resolution Foundation analysed the data to work out the target. So we looked at the gaps between the employment rates of different age groups, namely the gaps between peak employment rate of people aged 45 to 49. So that employment rate is 84%. And for people aged 50 to 64, the employment rate is it drops to 70%. So we want to reduce that gap by a third. And then for people aged 65 to 69, so that older age group, the employment rate is only 21%, and we want to reduce that gap by a quarter. So overall, adding up the numbers, it equates to around 1 million more, or a 12% increase in the number of employed people aged 50 to 69. So what does this mean for individual employers? So meeting this target means that each employer should aim to increase the number of people aged 50 to 69 in their workforce by 12%. So if you have 100 people, 100 older workers now, you would need to increase it by 12% to 112 by 2022. Now, with the population set to age between now and 2022, the number of older people in work will increase naturally, and the Resolution Foundation estimates that employment will increase by 400,000 for this age group as a result of demographic shifts. Now, that's 2/5 of the target already met, so employers very much need to prepare for that demographic change in their workforce and support those older workers, but also work to get the further 3/5 of the million into their workforce. Employers have 5 years to achieve this target, and of course, each employer will have its own starting point. But what's kind of really important is that every organisation really assesses its own business risk and its own workforce planning. So are you future-proof? Are you ready for this demographic change and this population ageing? And employers certainly need to be imaginative in order to make the most of our ageing population. Now, we've run through the target. We'll now look at why it's so important and the kind of broader context behind it. So increasing the share of older workers is absolutely necessary for society, the economy, businesses, and for the individual older people themselves. We'll start with society. So our population is ageing, which means that people are living longer. Birth rates have been declining year on year since 2012. And we have the baby boomer generation moving towards retirement. By 2030, half of all adults will be over 50. Now, the average age when leaving work is increasing, but it's not keeping up with life expectancy. And it's still lower than it was in 1950. Ideally, an individual would not actually spend more than 1/3 of their life in retirement, so enabling people to stay in work for longer as the population ages is absolutely key. And this is not about making people work until they drop or kind of pushing them into bad quality work that they don't really want to do but they're forced to do. It's about giving older workers the same opportunities for employment, for good quality work and progression, and making sure that age doesn't hold back their success in the workplace. So unless we take action, the economy will be under pretty immense pressure as demographics change. And if we're looking at the actual workforce and thinking about workforce gaps, by 2022, the UK will have 700,000 fewer people aged 60 to 49, but 3.7 million people aged 50 to state pension age. Since 2013, the levels of immigration into the UK has filled this gap left by the ageing population, the gap in the workforce, which sees more people leave the workforce through retirement and emigration or death than enter it. And Mercer has actually analysed migration data and is already seeing the impact of Brexit on reduced migration numbers. They looked at 4 different scenarios to kind of project the impact, the potential impacts of migration to the UK. So if there was absolutely no migration to the UK by 2030, there would be a 2.5 million gap in the workforce. So we absolutely need to make the most of our older workers. Some employers might ask, what about automation? If we're making job cuts and automating tasks, will this not help to fill the gap and increase productivity? Well, if unemployment rises due to automation, then consumer spending is likely to decrease. And McKinsey Global Institute found that whilst, yes, automation is absolutely necessary to achieve economic growth goals, these goals will only be met if human labour is redeployed and if the employment rate is maintained. So it is increasingly important to maintain that employment rate. Now, for employers that are set to cut employee numbers over the next 5 years, when we're thinking about the target, these employers should really try to focus on increasing the proportion of the older workers in their workforce, if they can't kind of focus on the overall number of older workers. So looking at the economy in terms of providing for the retired population, currently there are 12 million people of working age heading towards inadequate retirement incomes. And the government found that of 55 to 64-year-olds, there are 37% of women and 19% of men that don't have private pension savings at all. And this is 10 years before they're due to retire. So as this retired population grows and the working age population shrinks, it will be increasingly difficult to provide. And keeping people in work for a little bit longer is an obvious solution. So if we look at the opportunities then of employing older workers, Saga and the Centre for Economics and Business Research found that £88 billion could be added to GDP in terms of consumer spending, and if the employment rate matched, if the employment rate of 50 to 64-year-olds matched that of 35 to 49-year-olds, it could boost GDP by 56%. If the employment rate of workers aged 55 and over matched that of Sweden, which is the highest performing EU country, it could add 5.8% to GDP. And research by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research found that by adding 1 year to everyone's working life, we could increase GDP by 1% per year, and that's the equivalent to 18 billion in 2015 after a period of transition. So there's huge economic opportunities to be seized just by enabling people to work, if only just a year longer. So let's look at why employers can actually benefit from older workers themselves. Now, both the workforce and the population are aging, so having a diverse workforce that actually reflects your customers will only improve customer service and reputation. And there have been invaluable, there's been really good research into the benefits of customer service. So McDonald's, in partnership with the Centre for High Performance HR at Lancaster University, has shown that the best performing McDonald's restaurants have the highest mean age for employees. And restaurants employing at least one person over the age of 60 reported levels of overall customer satisfaction that were more than 20% higher than in stores with nobody over the age of 50. Older workers definitely will have invaluable insights into products and services for older customers. There's a huge benefit there. Other benefits to business include reduced turnover. So on average, older workers tend to stay in a job role for longer than younger workers. Older workers are 5 times less likely to change jobs compared with workers aged 20 to 24. And because recruiting is very expensive, if you're able to retain, then you'll save money as a business. Other research has found that older workers are half as likely to take sick day compared to their younger counterparts. So you can reduce sickness absence. The skills, experience, and networks of older workers can be absolutely invaluable for employers. So older people have a wealth of experience that they've gained throughout their lifetimes, both within and outside of work. They're also much more likely, I don't think this is talked about very often, but they're much more likely to have built up kind of relationships and networks over time. And for many employers, this is incredibly valuable. And once those people leave your workforce, you are quite likely to kind of lose those relationships and networks as well. And of course, businesses can also benefit from intergenerational workforces. So within teams, having a more diverse team, it kind of minimises groupthink. You increase knowledge sharing and different perspectives and improve problem solving. So finally, older people want to work, but not all of them are being given the same opportunity as the younger colleagues. So this target is also just the right thing to do from a moral perspective. Now, our research found that there are a missing million people over 50 in the UK who are out of work, but they do actually want to work if they had the right opportunities available to them. Research undertaken by the government has found that many older workers are leaving work involuntarily before they reach state pension age, and they're struggling to get back into the labour market. So they found that 1.1 million people aged 50 to 64 left work in the past 8 years involuntarily. And a huge reason for this is dismissals and redundancies. So 37% of unemployed older workers left in the past 8 years because they were either dismissed or made redundant. And we can look at people who are out of work for other reasons at the moment. So people who are no longer seeking employment, many of those were originally made redundant or dismissed. 20% of those who are currently inactive because they're caring originally left in the last 8 years due to being dismissed or made redundant. 14% of people who are currently inactive because of ill health originally left because they were either dismissed or made redundant. Now, this is a huge issue that often goes unseen because the status of people aged 50 to 64 might change, but kind of the cultural idea that older workers should sort of make room for younger workers and therefore should be made redundant first is completely out of date and discriminatory. So it's definitely something that we need to tackle. Now, age discrimination does still exist, and this has been found by researchers at Anglia Ruskin University. So they applied for 2,000 jobs over a 2-year period using very carefully constructed CVs, and they found that older applicants were 4.2 times less likely to be offered an interview, despite having more experience and similar skills and interests. And that bias was far more pronounced for women as well. And part of this is bias against skills. So older people have skills, many older people, not all, but many have skills which are not always apparent in job interviews or kind of the trendy skills that are really sought after by some employers, even though those employers do actually find them incredibly valuable. So we need to try and figure out how we can make the most of those skills throughout the whole recruitment process. There are other issues why people, kind of older workers, are being forced or pulled out of the workforce. A lot of workers over 50 either have caring responsibilities where they're caring for elderly people. Many might be sandwich carers where they're caring for children or grandchildren as well as their elderly parents. And many other older workers might start to be experiencing health conditions which means that they're no longer able to continue working. So being able to kind of transform the workplace and enabling more flexibility and autonomy and changing some of those activities that these older workers do, if that can help them stay in work for longer, then it's absolutely crucial to do that. So how can employers meet the target in their own organisations and encourage and support older workers to stay in their workforce? So there are 3 key steps to increasing the share of older employees, which we've outlined, which are, first of all, understand, then listen, then act. So understanding the shape of your own force is the necessary first step. You should be monitoring and collecting data of your employees and their age. So understanding the workforce profile in terms of how many older workers you have overall and which kind of functions or levels of seniority are they concentrated in. Understanding this and getting a good picture of where the older workers are is what you need to do before you decide your course of action. And we do have a diversity benchmark available if anybody needs help with that kind of monitoring and benchmarking against other organisations and competitors. The next step is to listen. And this is so important. Employers really need to try and understand the needs and perspectives of their older workers in order to retain them. Now, employees aged over 50 are a huge, diverse group. They're not a homogenous group of people in the slightest, just as any age. So people will have varied needs and perspectives, but there may also be some common themes that do affect older workers more than younger workers. And understanding this is also absolutely crucial to kind of deciding your plan of action to support and retain them. And you can do this through staff surveys or focus groups. And we do have tools on our website as well to help you conduct this research into your older employees. Finally, once you've got a good understanding of the perspectives of your older workers and what your workforce looks like, we can start taking action. So we've kind of adopted the government's mantra of retain, retrain and recruit, which is a really great summary of the 3 different key areas that we need to focus on. So to retain older workers, some examples of what employers can do are supporting older employees through these transitions in later life, so becoming a carer, developing a health condition, potentially bereavement. Workplace support around those is really important to retaining older workers and ensuring that they still feel supported and included and valued at work. Enabling agile working is something that older workers increasingly find valuable. It's not just millennials that want more autonomy and flexibility over their work, it's older workers as well. Training line managers to care for to support older workers who might have caring responsibilities or other types of responsibilities is really important. To retrain, you can look at midlife career reviews. So I think older workers tend to there's an assumption that if you're sort of in your 50s and 60s, you don't necessarily want to keep progressing or have career changes, but actually that's not necessarily true. And retraining and upskilling and progressing is still so important for people later in their working life as it is for people earlier in their career. But being able to start those conversations with employees is really important. And finally, to recruit older workers, employers just really need to bias-proof all processes, from job advertisements to hiring and interviewing, how to attract older workers, and then how to keep them engaged throughout the recruitment process. And also to look at transferable skills as well if people are looking for career changes or have been out of the workforce for whatever reason. Now, we're also asking employers to commit and publish. Now, this is to ensure that we're on track to achieving 1 million more older workers by 2022. So commit and publish, you can find out more about this on our website, and the link is on the slide. We're asking employers to commit to collaborating with us to reach the target, and then to publish the number and percentage of older workers in their workforce in order to create transparency as we work towards the target. We have 10 companies who are already leading the way on age transparency. So you can go and look at their workforce data on our website today. Finally, I think we're going to look at some stories from businesses. So Aviva is a brilliant employer who is absolutely leading the way on older workers. They've done a lot of work around age-inclusive recruitment and supporting carers, so changing the language and imagery and job adverts, making sure that all new vacancies are open to flexible working, training line managers to effectively manage carers. They've also reviewed their carers leave policy, and the way they did this was they looked at their existing policy, they gained feedback on kind of manager reaction and whether it was being used, and this led to a pilot of a revised policy. So Aviva are now in the final stages of approval, which will put carers leave on a much more similar basis to parental leave. And they also have a lot more online resources for carers. Barclays are doing some slightly different work around working towards the target. So they've moved away from the restrictions of government-led apprenticeships, and they did this in 2015. They opened up their apprenticeship opportunities to people of all ages through their older apprenticeships. So since they launched, they've taken on over 70 Boulder apprentices, and they've recruited people in their 50s and 60s who are looking for a slight career change or might have been out of the workforce for some time. And their older ratio in apprenticeships has grown from 4% to 20%. So Barclays has very much expanded its talent pool and increased their brand value. And through kind of gaining much greater experience, understanding of their older customers, they've seen their customer service improve as well. Home Instead Senior Care are another organisation that are absolutely leading the way on older workers, especially around recruitment. So they have 8,000 workers who are, and most of whom are over 40. Many are actually in their 70s and 80s as well, and quite often older than the people that they care for. But that enables them to have a really good connection with people that they care for. They found Facebook as a very, very useful way to recruit older workers, as well as getting out into the local communities and face-to-face recruiting through local networks like the WI or Rotary clubs and church groups. And they also have a dedicated jobs website, which they've really looked at the imagery around that and the type of workers that they're attracting. They're using profiles of older workers who have gone on to have second careers with them as well. So you can see a lot more stories from businesses and our leadership team companies on our website at age.bitc.org.uk, and much more information as well. So we have a lot more information around the business champion role, our targets, and some more kind of tools and resources and toolkits to help you retain, retrain and recruit older workers in your workforce. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the question and answers. So if you do have any questions, do send them through. So one person has asked, has there been any analysis of the extent to which the rapid drop-off in employment after 50 is a result of personal choice? Yes, there has. So there is the Fuller Working Lives Evidence Base 2017, which can be found on the Department for Work and Pensions website. And this is a big report with a lot of analysis around statistics and older workers leaving the labour market early. Now, personal choice is, of course, going to be part of why the drop-off happens, but it's not the whole picture. There's other research that kind of shows that people are more likely to be made dismissed and redundant, or having to leave the workforce through taking on caring responsibilities, or having health issues, which means they can't continue to care. And I think the key thing here is that even if this person might choose to leave because they're choosing to leave to take on more caring, the problem is that work is not working for these people. in its current state. So we do really need to try and transform our workplaces and our job design in order to try and enable more people to stay. And of course, not all workers over 50, if they do have to leave or choose to leave, we're not going to be able to retain all of them. And that's certainly reflected in the target as well. We're not looking to close that employment rate gap completely. We're just looking to close it by a third and a quarter for those two age groups. Another person has asked about those who left involuntarily and how that compares with other age groups. I don't actually have that information to hand, but that's a really good question. So I'll certainly go back to the resources and find an answer to that and see if I can circulate that afterwards with the slides. But yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you can absolutely have a list of resources. Someone's just asked. We'll send these around afterwards. There are some specific resources that I'll include in the email afterwards, but you can also go onto our website at age.bitc.org.uk and go to the resources tab. You'll find some research which always has big sections around recommendations for employers, but also some toolkits as well. So toolkits for how to engage your older employees through kind of non-traditional incentives, how to support older employees through transitions as well. So there's a question someone has asked here about how does the data change per sector, and are some sectors already leading the way? The answer is quite complicated. So there are certainly sectors which have a bigger, older workforce, and those employers may be less keen to try and increase the number of those older workers. But actually, as those people kind of move towards retirement, they're going to start to see some huge kind of gaps in their workforce. So kind of being able to retain, not necessarily recruit, but absolutely retain those older workers is going to be really, really important for those employers in some of those sectors. Sectors that have a much younger workforce, so kind of hospitality and sectors like that, call centres in particular tend to be, I know it's not a sector per se, but there are certain areas and types of work that have younger workforces. And I think those employers really need to try and look at how they can rebrand that type of work or that sector, or make adjustments so that they can actually start to attract more older workers, because as a kind of younger talent pool shrinks, that's going to be really important if they want to employ more people and grow. Do we have any guidance on how to get the most from intergenerational teams and achieving the benefits? So we are currently partnering with the Centre for Ageing Better on some research into the benefits of intergenerational teams. So that will be published in February 2018. We have some very, very simple fact sheets on our website at the moment around intergenerational working. But that's absolutely something that we'll be looking more at in the coming months. So do keep an eye out. Okay, so there's no more questions coming through. Do feel free to email me if you think of any other questions afterwards. So my email address is there, jenny.lincoln@bitc.org.uk. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I hope you kind of have a much better idea of why we've set this target. It's definitely a challenging one, but I think it's absolutely achievable, and it's also just so important. both at the kind of macro level for the economy, but also just for those individual people who are just not being given the same kind of opportunities and finding it much more difficult to get back into work the older they get. So I hope you've kind of feel a bit more informed and inspired to take some action, but absolutely do get in touch if you'd like to know a bit more. And have a great day.